Okay, good morning, everyone. Let's get started. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Michael Cook. This is the 6th webinar exploring the functionality of Powerproject. We'll be looking at risk analysis today, a very powerful feature of the software. Previous webinars are on the Solid Support website, where you will also find information on Powerproject's online training courses run by Darren Maynard from Solid Support. Remember that Solid Support can help with your Powerproject setup, templates, code libraries, risk reporting, programs, and 4D modeling. Please get in touch with us. We are once again lucky to have Chris Ray with us from Elikosoft to conduct today's session. So over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you everyone for joining. So for those of you, I see a few people just joining at the moment. For those of you who joined and haven't been on any of these before, you are all actually muted, so we can't hear you at this point. But through the GoToWebinar functionality, there is an option for a question section, so you can raise a question there. I have that on my other screen, so I will see those pop up, and I'll aim to answer them there and then, or we'll aim to deal with them at the end of the webinar. So again, thanks again for attending. So to start off with, this session is the part 6 of our sessions of webinars, and this is looking at risk analysis using Powerproject. So I will start off now, and if everyone does have any questions, as I do ask in there. So, and following this, the recording will be available. I think 2 hours after the session is finished will be available. The link you've got, you can go and rewatch anything. So the first thing we'll look at is what we're going to cover in this webinar this morning, and that is first we're going to look at what is risk, just a very brief overview, risk inside a project, very small definition of that, when to use risk analysis on your project, and then we're going to look at risk analysis in Powerproject, what it is, what Powerproject has built into it. Then we're going to have a see it in action session, so we're going to have a demonstration, look at it in action, and then any questions that may follow at that point. So the first part, again, and we'll look at is what is risk, and this is just a very small definition. If you look around, there's massive definitions about risk and everything in projects, but really it boils down to it's looking at uncertain events or conditions that if it occurs can have a positive or negative. And that's the thing, is the risk may actually have a positive impact on your project, because you could complete something faster than you expected. So it could be positive or negative impact there, and understanding these items that are causing risk will help you reduce the risks on that project. So that's really the aim of what we're going to do in the risks. There's a lot more definitions, a lot more to go into on it. We say we're just looking at it as a starting point here. Looking at what risk analysis is inside Powerproject, and really going back just before that, when you would use risk, and it's, you know, it is when you look to identify those uncertainties inside a project that you have. So inside Powerproject, risk analysis is a standard feature in Powerproject, so which means there is no additional cost associated with this feature. So if you have Powerproject now, you have the risk analysis functionality. It's just a standard option inside there. It allows to highlight tasks that carry the biggest risk in there, and there's a variety of methods that can be done that, and we'll look at that and highlight, and we can also highlight the probability of tasks happening. And again, when we start talking about and showing that, but that would be, for example, if you had delivery items that there was a risk of a delivery not happening, or weather conditions, you could plan for that, inclement weather inside your project with different tasks and give them a probability of happening. And then when it runs through, it will use that probability of going through. Now, there are the different methods of sampling. So we have different methods of sampling. This is the algorithm that's used to actually run a risk analysis. Now, we use the Monte Carlo simulation as a main function, which is, if people talk about risk, most people have heard of. But you can also have the Latin hypercube, which is a Monte Carlo using the Latin hypercube algorithm. And in general terms, what that does is that the Latin hypercube means you can run less iterations and still get a reasonable result graph from it. But well, you know, I'm not going to go into details of how the algorithm works. It's fairly complex at this point, so but we use those too. And understand those techniques, allows you to see the impact of the risks and, and allows you to visualize what happens on it. So really just to talk about risk itself, and when we talk about the various levels, a variety of levels that we can actually look at risk on a project, we can assign risk at a task level. So this is in detail. So if you want to get really into it, you can go through every activity in your project and assign the minimum and maximum duration. So here, for example, we have a 10-day task. In this 10-day task, we can say, well, actually, it could be done in 6 days, but it also could take up to 14 days to do. So that difference between the 6 and 14 days is the risk and what the algorithm is going to calculate on every iteration. And when I say iteration, it will go through the project and the schedule, and it will alter the duration of every task based on your settings, reschedule, and it will then give you an end date and a cost to that project and income if you have that assigned in a different way to then and see how that impacts it. And obviously you'll have a probability of a very small percentage of being much earlier, and also a probability of when you guarantee to finish it by, which could be months later. So it will allow use all these durations. Now at detailed level, people would go in and set a minimum maximum duration, basically the risk of that task happening at a task level. But again, some people want to go down to that level. What other people would want to do is they have the ability to actually say, and you can create inside Powerproject. So if you know how to use Powerproject, you just create a code library and literally set the percentages instead. So the one I showed before, the 10-day and 6-day and 14-day could be a 60%. It could be completed in 60%, or it could be completed in 140%. Here's some example ones. So you could say 50 to 150 as code libraries. These can then be assigned to your project and to each task, and then it runs the iteration using that as a setting. Now, if you don't want to go down to the detail level and assign a code library to every task, you actually have the ability to assign it to a summary level. So you could assign that code library to the summary task, which we have here on line 2, and say that's 50 to 150%, and it will assume it for all of the tasks inside. So again, you can very quickly assign at either a task level or a summary level, or if you don't want to do any of that, you can actually, within the settings of risk analysis, you can actually define a minimum duration percentage and a maximum duration percentage, and it will use that across all the tasks. Now, what does this mean? Obviously, if you assign at detailed level, you're going to get a much more accurate, because it's going to assess each task based on the minimum and maximum duration you've assigned. But it also means that you could bring in a project into here and just assign the high level default value risks across a project and run a risk analysis to see how your finish date actually works. Now, I'll take that a step further. If you're not a Powerproject user, you could take your P6 XER, import it into Powerproject, set the default percentages, and run risk analysis against your project and get reports and sensitivity reports across from it. You could import a Microsoft project file and run your risk analysis without having to assign the individual minimum and maximum durations. So you can take a file from another system and bring it in, run risk analysis. So even if you're not planning in Powerproject, you could use this as a risk analysis tool to work. But again, you could also bring in those values, bring in those projects from those systems, and assign a minimum maximum duration if you so wanted to. So we assign that. Now, if we then look at, if I'm just going to step back briefly on a couple of slides where we have this one here, we have a 10-day task, we have 6-day and 14-day minimum maximum duration. We then have the ability to decide on the actual distribution, and this is how the calculation works. So we've got a uniform distribution here. So in other words, it will look from the minimum duration, which is the beginning in there, to the maximum duration of there, and it's going to be equally randomized and use the algorithm across that. If we use uniform, if we use normal, it's going to look more in the middle of that range than it would if you use the skewed normal PERT. It'll just front loading it, and then you can have skewed triangular. And this is an option you can set as a overall distribution of how it works the calculation out, or you can set this at specific task levels, each task if you wanted to. So again, and you can choose that actually generally it'd be uniform, but there may be certain tasks that you want to have it as normal or skewed. So you can really decide. So you can really start playing with it to home in on, how that activity's risk is assessed using the system. Once as well as risk, a big part of it is, as what I talked about before, was probability. And inside Powerproject, at a task level, you can set the minimum maximum duration you see there, but you can also set a task probability. And I'll show you this inside there. But again, this could be inclement weather, this could be delivery impacts or delays. So you could actually draw a task in that was called delivery delay and have that linked in with your system. And actually you can put a probability on it. Now, if you set a probability of 100, that means it's 100% likely to happen. And if that means it's always going to be in the schedule. Now, use the minimum and maximum durations to work on that. But if you set that as 80, so 80% likely to happen, then actually when it does its iterations, only around 80% of those iterations, that task will even be there as a duration. It'll just be a milestone in the others. So it has no duration. So again, you can see how that could impact, and I'll see if it's inclement weather or something, you can increase the percentage of likelihood or reduce it. So you can really put in those items that are very unlikely to happen but have a chance to happen in there. So we'll look at that as well. And again, you can tell it whether you want to use those minimum, maximum, and probabilities that you've assigned, or just to use the values you assign at a high level. And we'll go through that as we see it. Now, we're going to see this in action now, so I will switch across to Powerproject in here. And here we have Powerproject. It's just a very simple project, and we have a baseline there already on there. And as you see, the way it's set up is we've actually created a code library called 50 to 100, 75 to 125, and so forth. Now, if I look at this project, I can go into every task on another screen. There we go. And I can look at the task, and I can look at the risk section, and there's my minimum, maximum duration, and my probability. And this is where I can decide if I want to use the normal default, or do I want to have the distribution of that calculation unique on that task. Now, I've got these in here, and I could go through this dialog for every task, but I can actually add the columns in as well. And what I have here is I have a view just called risk that's set up that now shows me my minimum duration, my normal duration, my maximum duration, and also it's got code library on there, which we'll show in a moment. So this is where I can go in and actually specify against each one the minimum, maximum durations that I may want to assign. So again, this task here, 4 weeks, but it could take only 2 weeks, but it could take 5 weeks in total. And so as it goes through, it's going to vary between the 2 weeks and 5 weeks based on the distribution assigned to it on there. But then the next task I've got could be 4 days, could be 4 weeks. So it's a different risk on there. It's much more likely to be, you can see here the duration can be extended. Well, that one's only a week. This is up by 2 weeks. So I'm uniquely setting this at these values. And again, these can just be typed in and placed in as you go through. Now, if I didn't want to put those in there, then I could actually choose this percentage here. So I could choose for something like, if we looked at this 2-week task here, I could say it's 50 or 100%, 50 or 150. So it could be 1 week or it could be 3 weeks or so forth. And you can see it's been assigned in there. Let's turn that off now as well in there. So there we go. Once that would be assigned and I've set all of this up, I have my project and I can then look at the risk. Now to get to the risk, you just go literally open up the project tab and then there is a risk analysis. So anyone that has Powerproject, risk analysis is there. If that risk analysis is not there, it could be that you've got multiple projects open inside, or you've got the dialog already open somewhere else. So I'm just going to open this up and going to look at this as we go through. Now, in here, these are the settings. So first of all, the scope. The scope is everything in the project. Branch might be just one summary and below. The view, it means you've run a filter and you've filtered out certain activities and they are the items you want to run the risk on. So if you have a very large project, you could run it on just one section. You could also choose to run it on just a branch of the project as it goes. You might run filters as well. So we're going to run it on everything. It's only a few tasks in here. It's not much. We've got interruptible tasks. You can include those. Buffer tasks, we can include those. Number of iterations. And they said I've mentioned this before, but what the number of iterations does is how many times it will run through changing the durations and calculating the differences for us in there. So again, I'll talk about that as we start running it, but I'm not going to run 1,000 on this, and I'm going to run, I'm just going to run 25 on this at this point here. I can choose it for it to snap to task unit if I wanted to. So I could choose to snap to days if I wanted to, but I'm not going to let it. Again, you have to be aware of that, because if you've got tasks less than a day long, it could mean the next task now might start halfway through the afternoon. So you may want to snap it to days. In there, you can do a schedule check to see if you're ready for there, and you can choose the time unit it runs on. Here you have the distribution, and this is the global distribution, as I was talked about before. This will allow you to say, well, actually, in this one, I want to literally go from the beginning to the end, so the minimum to the maximum duration, anywhere between that, or I'm going to do normal as mentioned before. And then you have the sampling method, which is the Monte Carlo sampling method that uses the algorithm, Monte Carlo algorithm, or you have the Latin hypercube. The Latin hypercube can give you better results with fewer iterations. So that's, we're going to go with Monte Carlo in there and go with that. And then we look at the task risk. So we're going to use the minimum and maximum duration set. If we didn't want to use that, we could untick that and say we're going to use the code library. And it would then use that code library we've assigned over here, and the risk side over here, if we've assigned those to tasks. And then if no code has been assigned, then do we want to use the one on the owning bar, because if it's multiple bar tasks on the bar, or the owning summary and expanded? So it will look up the hierarchy to find the last assigned percentages. So you could assign the percentages to a summary rather than the individual tasks, but to have different risks assigned. Then we can say, well, actually, I haven't assigned any minimum maximum durations. I haven't assigned any code libraries in here. So just use the default percentages. And so that means every task it looks at, this minimum duration is 50% of that task duration, the current task duration, and the maximum is 150%. So I can use those if I want to. As I have it here, I've got my minimum maximum, so that's what I'm going to use. And once I've done that, I'm going to then click on the generate button now. And when I click on generate, you'll see it starts generating. These are the number of iterations it's doing. Now, people comment on this. They say, oh, it's, in other systems, they see it really fast and working out, and it rattles through them really, really fast. And if you were going to run 1,000 iterations, you'd have to go and make yourself a cup of tea while it runs. The difference here, when we do it inside Powerproject, it's not just running an algorithm to work out a finished date and a cost to the project. What it's actually doing is it's adjusting all those durations in your project. It's running a reschedule to work out the finished date. And then it is recording and remembering every task position and duration and setting for that iteration in its memory. and then it's doing it again. It then resets it back and runs it again, and then resets it back and runs it again. And it does that here. It did that 25 times. Now, actually, you would want to run it more than 25 times in there. And I'm just going to close that down. It does tell me I'm disregarding those settings. I'm going to move that out of the way, and I'm going to move one here that I created earlier. And this one here of Powerproject, I have done 1,000 iterations on this side. And these are the results that I have. Now, because my project has been cost loaded, and that cost loaded is based on time inside here. And if I just, again, I can move this up and open this out more so I can see it. We can see that in here, we have a 0.1% chance of actually achieving a finish date of the 1st of October 2020, and which is 41 days early, with a cost of $76,000. And then if I look at here, as we go down, you can see the percentages likelihood of hitting these go all the way down, and these are ranked in the 1,000 iterations we've done. And if I go right down to the bottom, I mean, we have 100% chance of hitting the 14th of January 2021 with a cost of $126,000. Now again, you'll see that the values, the 99% chance is actually higher cost, and that's because the tasks that have been changed may have been more cost loaded than other tasks. So classically, when people talk about risk analysis, they may talk about the P20 and P80. So for example, here the P80 is the 80% chance of likelihood. If I look at that here, there's my P80 there, and that says I've got 80% chance of hitting the 2nd of December there with 118,000. And I'm looking at that, and I might want to, and if I want to, I could, I can export this whole table. But actually, more interesting for me is I want to know, what does that schedule actually look like? Now I can create the project from the iteration by actually moving the whole schedule to it. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a baseline. And so I'm going to create a baseline for this, which I'm going to call the P80. And I'll finish that. If I just move this to the side, you can see I've now got a second baseline in there. And if I just go to my format section and turn off my original, you can now see, based on that iteration, that these are the task durations and placements based on the P80 that I've got in there. And again, if I wanted to, I can choose any of these ones here. So I could choose P20 or P50, depending on how you're using risk and what you want to get out of it. You can see I can choose any of those. So I can create a baseline from any of these just by selecting it and creating a baseline inside there. And that's why it takes a little bit longer, because it's not just doing a calculation, it's remembering all that data for the whole project as it goes. Now, once you've looked at this and you've reviewed and looked at this, we then have a number of options. You can export this data to the clipboard, to Excel, you can copy the grid to the clipboard itself in there, or you can get some reports. And you've got two types of reports we can get out of this. Now, if I look at the sensitivity report, it's just opened up here, it allows me to look at from a duration basis, cost basis, or critical index side. And I'm going to look at mainly the duration one as we're focusing on that. And what it will do is it will list out the tasks that have the greatest impact, so the greatest risks. This is really useful because out of those 1,000 iterations, task 8 has a 75% chance. It's going to exceed by 75%. So it's out of all of them, it's had the highest risk. It's got the highest risk on it. It could be a positive risk, could be a negative risk. So it could be, here it says 75%. It could be that it's actually, it could be a negative. so which means it's going to finish it's got 75% chance of finishing earlier. But it does mean I can use this sensitivity to understand the highest task. Now, at the moment, it's only showing me a number of tasks. I can increase, I've set up to 11, but it's only got, I think, 9 tasks or so currently being displayed, because they're the ones that are impacted on it. But I could increase that if I had more tasks in my project, and I can display the options. I can include the summary tasks, hammocks tasks, and milestones if I so wanted to. But this is really useful because it allows me not to home in on those activities based on these iterations that have been perceived as the biggest risk in here. And again, I can do the same thing with cost. And you notice here that when I look at cost, it's a different set of tasks. Task 8 is the one that's having the biggest issue, but actually in cost-wise, task 2 is the second highest risk one that we have there, but it's task 3 from a duration perspective. So it depends on how you're looking at this and how you want to use this information. So I can look at those, and I can export this into clipboard, I can print it, I can copy it to Excel, so I can use this information as I go through it. It gives me the settings that were used inside there. So this part is really important because the first part gets you the results and gives you some high level finish dates. Going in here allows you to assess which items are actually going to be causing you the biggest problem. So I come out of that, and then the other report we've got here is if I look at likelihood and distribution, what this brings up for me, up on a different screen, in here, is it shows me the number of iterations for all after 1,000 iterations I did. These are the different end dates that I have and how many times they were hit. The yellow one up here is my current finish date. But you actually see an average, it's thinking that I'm going to be finishing around here. So the more iterations you do, the more this information becomes filled out, and more, the curve and the graph will be completed. So you have your mean in the middle and your standard deviations at the side. And again, it allows you to look at that. And this is finish date on there. This is the cost. You know how much you're going to be finishing on cost. That's what we're saying it's going to cost, but it thinks it might cost down here. So you can see that you've got income and margin. If you did use income, you can get the margin out of the two. So you can get all of this information straight from the risk analysis. And as I said before, you could take a project that that's come from another system, and you could run risk analysis and produce these risk reports. You could share this information. If you ran it on a subcontractor view with only one certain subcontractor, you could do a risk analysis on all the activities that subcontractor is working on. So you can really go to town on this. Now, what I would say is that, and again, what some people don't always realize is if I close this, cancel on this and close this down, it will close and lose these settings. Now, if I've baselined from it, I'll keep those baselines, but it's gone. If I reran it, I would get different results, because remember, this is an algorithm using like a randomization and taking those durations and the risks, the minimum and maximum durations, and giving me a result at the end of it. So it's not going to come back with the same results every time. The more iterations, the smoother that will be. But it just means that I'd have to rerun it and spend how I'm going to have my 1 or 2 cup of teas while it runs. Depends on the size of the project and the number of iterations. I run 1,000. A lot of people run 5,000 iterations on it, and it just runs through. And obviously, you can export that data and do what you want with it, or bring that data into Powerproject. Now, if I cancel on that, which will lose those results in there, you can see now that I have my project and my baseline in here as I'm looking on there. And if I then just, for a quick example, I put a new histogram inside here, and I said that it was going to be looking at my cost and my project cost, I imagine. There's my project cost inside there. That's my comparison. If I just change the baseline to my P80, I can get a cost graph, cumulative graph, based on the red being my actual schedule, and then the blue being my baseline P80 and how the costs are going to deviate over time. And again, I could do that by month, by week, or whatever. If I had resources, I could see how the resources were impacted inside there. The key is this is really quick and easy to do. So, you know, there's no opening up a separate application, logging in, importing a file, setting all the settings up and, you know, in there and running a complex, you know, range of settings stuff in. Here it's pretty much is just literally, you know, if you want to add the minimum maximum durations. If you don't want to add those, you can do it at high level. You can choose the level you want to do it yourself, set your probability, and then run your risk analysis inside. And very quickly, you'll get your risk analysis data from it, and you can then start using that to highlight your tasks that are most at risk. And they may not be the tasks you think of, but based on the iterations about how the impact against the overall duration of the project, the sensitivity will tell you that. So that's really the risk analysis in a very brief way. It doesn't take long to do. Now, if you don't have Powerproject and you would like to have a go at using risk, you can go to our website. You can download a trial version of Powerproject. It gives you 14 days trial, which is full functionality of every function inside the software. So risk analysis will be there and work for you, and you can import with that files from P6, Microsoft Project, and so forth. You can even bring in SureTrack files as well. I believe P3 files if you really wanted to. It has to be batch files, so you can bring those into here as well. But you can play around with it, and obviously, if you do, you can also export data, export your projects to P6 or Microsoft Project if you wanted to. So we have those options inside there. Again, if you have any questions on this, you know, you can always go and speak to Solid Support. If anyone has any questions, do let me know. I think some of the questions that were asked already were answered off, you know, by the fact is it is a standard part of the project or the product. So you can bring it straight in. In there is no limit to someone's about the number of baselines you can create. Powerproject will allow you to create unlimited baselines. You can only display 10 at a time on screen, but you can have as many as you want. Other than that, I think they're the main questions we were asked. Other than that, thank you very much. I will just hand over to Michael if he's still there.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. If you've got questions and you would like a more detailed information or a more detailed webinar, feel free to contact the guys and girls at Solid Support. We'd be happy to run through it with you in more detail. But the recording will be up on our website by the end of the afternoon, and I think Elitosoft will send you a link to the recording as well. Thanks again, Chris, for running that for us.
Yes, just one more question. Someone's asked about, do the results take a lot of space? No, they're using while you're running risk analysis and you've got that dialog open. It's using memory on your computer, temporary files if it needs to. Once you close that down, the only space you now consume on your machine is with any baselines you created, which is very small in comparison.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Thanks again, guys. We'll see you again in the next webinar.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.